So this is called Who Took My Scope Probe? Anybody want to guess why I titled it Who Took My Scope Probe?
Because someone took your scope probe?
Yes, and they never give it back. Because in all our Tandy R&D, we literally had one scope probe. So my talk is two parts. The first part, I'm going to talk about the difference between Tandy and Radio Shack. Most people lump those all together as a single entity, but they were very different entities. All right, so I'm going to go over the time that I was at Tandy R&D from 1977 to 1993. Does anybody know why it stopped in 1993 offhand? What the event was? AST bought Tandy. But you don't know why they bought them, and I'll tell you. So my name is Paul Schreiber. I started off as a co-op, and then I left in 1993. And if you want to follow more of this kind of stuff, I have a Facebook group called Mostly True Tales, which just happens to be the name of the book I'm writing about this, called Mostly True Tales. And so I will preface it that everything you see and hear from me is in fact mostly true. So believe it or not, I actually used to look like this. My wife, who was a tech writer at Tandy, anybody here have a Model 3 or a Model 4? She wrote all the manuals for the Model 3 and Model 4. She thought I was either Jewish or Puerto Rican, or worse, a Puerto Rican Jewish guy. I'm from Germany. I don't know where she got that. This is the badge I found. Radio Shack and Tandy went through many different brandings. They couldn't figure out if you have questions, we have more answers, or we're the technology store or whatever. So in this point, it was a technology store. We were called TED, Tandy Electronics Design, which in the early days was called Tandy Systems Design. But when we had to have software, a software group, they split it between Tandy Software and Tandy Electronics. So up until the Model 1, there was no software, correct? I'm supposed to stay between here, and I am wandering around the room. So I started in 1977 as a co-op, which is a paid internship with Texas A&M University. And so I got minimum wage, but I only had to work there for one semester, and I got 1 hour of credit if I wrote a research paper. So I did this twice. I started off in January, February, March of 1977, and then I went to summer school, and I came back at the end of 1977. When I started in 1977, I wire wrapped the Model 1 prototype for the Model 1 computer. In 1977, they stuck me in the factory. I worked there for 2 extended periods after I graduated, from 1980 to 1984. Then I left for 4 years because I actually wanted to earn a living, and I had a baby. And then I came back in 1988 because that was my 4th layoff. I've only been laid off 7 times, and none of them were my fault. So I have a BSc from Texas A&M and a master's from SMU, and I own 12 patents, all from, let them in. I guess there's a chair there so that people could come in. Does the door automatically lock? Did that door lock on you? Okay, so let's make it unlock. Yeah. He's going to do that. You haven't missed anything exciting whatsoever. Okay. So part of this patent thing that I did was I spent time with the legal. So basically most of this time right here I was with Tandy Legal Department. Talk about that a little bit more. All right. I was one of only 2 floaters in the history of Tandy. So a floater meant I was not assigned to either computers or non-computers. So as I was needed, I would work on computer stuff. When our project was finished, I might go back and work on a car stereo. Then I finished the car stereo and work on a graphics board. Then I finished the graphics board and work on an answering machine, kind of a thing. Everybody else, there was an equivalent guy in software. So he would not work only on Tristos or only on the VAX. He would float around as needed. So the two of us were the floaters. And I really liked that because I got to work on both computers and non-computer stuff as well. So some of the stuff I worked on in consumers, car stereos, computers Model 2000, and I was patent activity. So legally in the United States, you cannot call yourself an engineer unless you have something. Anybody know what something you have to have to call yourself an engineer? You have to have a PE, professional engineering license. I was the only licensed engineer at Tandy for like 12 years. So I was the only person that had the word engineer on this badge. All right, so let's talk about this between Tandy and Radio Shack. All right, so I did not major in graphics art at college. So before the TRS-80, Tandy, most of their designs went to Radio Shack. So Radio Shack was our biggest customer. But it's important to remember they were not our only customer. Anybody heard of Kenwood and Blaupunk? We made most of their equipment. Okay, Tandy did. Now, no one knows that until now, but we did. All right, so let's go the other direction. Radio Shack, before Rossetti, only bought between 40 and 55% of all the stuff in our store from Tandy. The rest of it they got from Sony, RCA, Hitachi, JVC, Victor. So although Radio Shack was Tandy's biggest customer, depends on we were or were not their biggest supplier, okay? So that, you can probably guess, caused a little bit of conflict. Who was more dependent on who, right? Tandy was much more dependent on Radio Shack than Radio Shack was dependent on Tandy. Now, you can probably guess what piece of equipment started to change that. The TRS-80 Model 1. Because they couldn't just go to Sony or Hitachi and get computers. But there's a problem with having something like a computer designed and built by your engineers in Fort Worth. Can you guess what that problem is? The problem is you have to build it. What does Radio Shack have to do here? Issue a PO. There's a lot of difference between issuing a PO and having factories with people and buying parts and making computers in there. And they never quite got that. So here's the Model 1. All right. So it was designed by one person. And that was the way that Tandy did for 99% of everything they did. One person. There's no I in team or whatever. There was not a group or a team. There was you, and you had to do it. And this was done by a guy named Steve Leininger. He graduated from Purdue with a master's degree in electrical engineering when he was 19 years old. Like I said, when I started at Tandy in January, February, March of '77, one of the things I did was I wire wrapped this board. So anybody here familiar with wire wrap? Okay. So if you're familiar with wire wrap, what company was the pinnacle of wire wrap? Augat. They had these beautiful gold-plated boards that cost thousands of dollars that you could put parts in and wire wrap, and they were all like A, B, C, D, 1, 2, 3. So you could say, wrap A5 to B9. Let's go play a bingo. But that's what Tandy did, right? Right?
No.
What'd they use? What did I wire wrap on?
Pegboards.
From where?
I have no idea.
Radio Shack, of course. I went down to Radio Shack and I got these little perf boards and I wrapped the whole frickin' Model 1 on 8 little Radio Shack perf boards. So I'm going to put some faces behind the names because a lot of people know one or two names. So part of my thing about writing this book is that there's more to Tandy and Radio Shack than just one or two people you may have heard of. So the people you may have heard of probably is John Roach, who was the CEO after Charles Tandy passed away, like in 1978 or something. But this is the guy who was on every dartboard at Tandy R&D, Bernie Appel. Notice he's the president of Radio Shack, not Tandy, okay? Not Tandy. So this is a typical ad that you may see from Tandy about a great invention that I claim that Tandy invented and never got credit for. Can you look at this picture and see what I'm talking about? What invention in this picture we never got credit for?
Joystick.
Wireless connectivity. There's not a cable plugged in there. And in fact, you will never see a cable plugged in any picture and any Radio Shack equipment. It's magic wireless. Okay? Also, they didn't know what computers were supposed to do. Nobody did. So obviously, we're going to pick the whitest family in America. They're so white that the Mormons are going, those people. And they're just watching the kid with the wireless joystick playing Pac-Man, which we didn't even have a license for.
So they had the Atari off screen running.
Oh, that's all done in pre-Photoshop where they actually cut it out and paste it. So not to be content with that thing, they said, we're going to continue this theme and have these people, not only can daddy do it, the daughter can do it. And then they said, no, we don't want all these families that aren't like a lot of people. We want a famous actor. This guy here. What was he? He was famous for only two things. What was the two things he was famous for? Correct, and? Right, The Incredible Hulk and My Favorite Martian. Now, when I think of and when I think of The Incredible Hulk, yeah, of course, but when I think of The Incredible Hulk, I think of high-end Tandy 2000 business computers. That immediately comes to mind. And I will say this, that he's the only person in America at this time who actually wore a sweater vest under his coat in time. So that didn't go off very well. So let's try to pick a personality who's more geeky than Bill Bixby, because computers are kind of geeky. Who knows who that is? What is ironic about this? Does anybody know Isaac Asimov to know why this whole campaign was probably the most ironic campaign in America? He wrote in longhand. He hated computers. He actually thought computers would be the end of mankind. We had to pay him 4 times my annual salary to take this picture.
Is that really his quote? Almighty dollar does wonderful things.
I don't know. All I can say is he's looking and he's pointing to the bank account number that's coming in. So that didn't work. So finally they gave it one last shot. They picked the geekiest person in America. Anybody want to guess at the time? We're talking 1990. Who's the geekiest person in America? This guy. This guy here. Yes, they picked Bill Gates. Now, Bill Gates is the answer to a Tandy trivia question. I don't know how many, are there any Tandy people here that like Tandy computers? What was the last piece of code that Bill Gates actually physically himself wrote? It goes into a Tandy product. Model 100, correct. Not to be outdone, Apple decided to do the same thing. So here we have a woman who always looks lovingly at her husband, who's so smart and clever, and they stole our wireless patent, so I had to sue them. And he's over here doing that's my personal intimacy, accuracy with the bank account going up. And of course, look over here, the Apple logo on the wall. So this was the Apple's first print ad. And then they decided to go to a different tact. And they printed, in my opinion, in today's world, the creepiest ad in history. This one. Pedo, woman looking at pedo's bottom, man looking at pedo's bottom. And the kid is saying, when I grow up, I'm going to be an ergonomics engineer because I love the way my thing stretches over, my neck is craning, and the floppy disk is pointing over here to the wall because that's how I'm going to set my computer up at home. Now, how do you think engineers at Tandy, the whole time this has gone on, would see our work presented to the public only to hear sales are down and we have no idea why? It must be something you guys are doing. So I want to talk about the two phases of Tandy R&D, before the Model 1 and after the Model 1. Okay, so before the Model 1, there was only 5 people in the whole of Tandy R&D. So they were doing projects for Radio Shack and occasionally for other companies, but mostly for Radio Shack. We had a manager, We had a manager who was also an engineer, a mechanical engineer, a draftsman. Remember draftsman, like a table and you draw with pen and paper, and 4 design engineers. Now I'm going to call them engineers because we all know they're not engineers because I was the only engineer. You ask, where was Tandy R&D? And I said, Fort Worth, Texas, but I didn't tell you where it was. Could you please read this line for me?
Stuffed in the rear of a former tire store.
That's where we were. Who believes I made that up? I didn't make it up. Tandy at one time had 17 different companies. Can anybody name some companies that Tandy owned besides Radio Shack? Wolf Nursery. Color Tile. O'Sullivan Computer Furniture. And his name's ring a bell? They kind of came and then went. And they also owned Snook Tire Company of Snook, Texas. And we were in a Snook tire store in the back of a Snook tire store. 600 square feet of space. So I want to talk about my co-op period briefly. So 9 months, it was 3 months, go to school 3 months, and so on. So my first job was etching PC board in the women's bathroom of the tire store. So who here has etched their own circuit boards? Okay. So what do you use to etch circuit boards? What's the chemical?
Sodium.
Ferric chloride.
Yeah, ferric chloride. It's nasty.
Yes, very nasty.
Is it? So would it have been a bad idea for me to dump my used ferric chloride in the toilet of the women's bathroom and flush it?
I'm not commenting on anything for recordings.
I didn't say I did it. I said it would have been a bad idea if back in 1977 I had dumped over 500 gallons of ferric chloride into the public waste system of Fort Worth municipality. Okay. Speaking hypothetically. Now, the reason I actually had to stop doing that after a short time, because it took all my fingernails off my fingers.
Oh.
I know, TMI, but by the way, there's a company called JLC PCB in China. You can just send them a CAD for $5. So just do that.
Yeah, it is weird.
You don't have to prove anything to me that I etched my own boards. I said, do you have your fingernails? So what was I etching? We were doing TV game like Pong. Pong TV games were big. And so I was etching the prototypes for the Pong game. And so my first design, so when I went to school, I had to write a paper and I had to do a design of something. So the original Pong games had knobs that you turned. But that's kind of hard to turn a knob left to right and have a paddle go up and down, right? What would be better?
Lever.
If it went up and down, and the paddle went up and down. So that's what I did. So I designed the paddle controllers for the TV scoreboard, and then I wire wrapped them all on one prototype. Okay, so then I went back to school. When I came back, I was expecting to go back into the tire store. But they said, no, we're going to make you a repair tech at the Model 1 factory. And they were offered my duty. I said, I don't want your offer. They said, can you be there tomorrow at 7 a.m.? So we had a quota to do. So our quota, and when I say quota, there were 4 of us. So the 4 design engineers who used to design stuff were now all in the factory lined up on a table like this with the scope and a Radio Shack voltmeter. That's all we had. And we had to fix 50 boards a day, every one of us. So how many people were there?
4,
How many boards do we have to fix?
50,
How many is that total?
200 per shift.
Who says that that seems like a big number to have bad every day? How many people think that we actually,
Were there?
huh?
How many shifts were there?
1 shift. How many people think that's all that was, some days we didn't have 50, some days we only had 10. How many people think there were some days we had 300 to fix? Let's just say that after a couple of months, they had over 5,000 boards.
Was the same thing wrong with each one?
Yes, they were built incorrectly. I pay him to do that. So this is what I did. So this is a TV scoreboard. You can see the little paddle that goes up and down. I was real proud of that. So listen to me very carefully. If you or any of your children say, Dad, you're never going to use all that algebra and all that kind of stuff. So in order to do this, I had to use 3 equations and 3 unknowns. And so I did it. I used matrix algebra because I had to have 3 resistors because the paddle goes back and forth, right? Does that paddle, what's it hooked to inside? Potentiometer, right?
Right.
So when you have a potentiometer in your hand and you're turning it, who knows how many degrees in a circle it goes? 300. They go trust me, look it up. They go 300. What do you think that can go? It's flat. What does it go?
180,
Thank you. What do I have to map?
twice as much.
180 to 300. Does that evenly go? No.
No.
That was pretty hot stuff back then. Okay, let's not quibble that it doesn't go all the way to the top. The other thing we did is, who knows what that even is? Don't say because you know everything. Not a degausser, magnetic eraser for cassette tapes. So there's a big inductor and you plug it in the wall and it goes, and the airplanes fall from the sky. So this is the kind of stuff that we did for Tandy Radio Shack. And remember, you do something like that, you sell 40,000 a year. So it's no small potatoes. Now I'm going to talk about the number 1 selling item that we did and had to support. And this one item made millions of dollars. You probably can't read what it is. Does anybody know what it is?
Stereo amplifier for a car.
It goes into a car. What? What about a wiper? What about a wiper? So can we call it intermittent wipers? No, because remember there's a whole movie about a guy who'd patented it. So you can't say intermittent wiper because he had wiper delay unit.
Yeah.
We sold 200,000 of those kits. That's the good news. All right? So it was a kit. Wasn't much of a kit. So when you built it, you had to wire it into your car, right? Does that sound reasonable?
Yeah.
Who thinks that there's more than 100 ways to wire them into cars? It turns out there's around 400 individual ways. So who knows what a Chilton is? We had every Chilton all the way back to 1940, because we had people who wrote in. Before the internet, you had to write letters, and you wrote on a piece of paper and everything. And legally, when you write it, so legally, if you send an email, you don't have to respond. You can't delete it, but you don't have to respond. You write a letter, you're a corporation, you have 30 days to respond, or you can be sued. We had a full-time engineer who would get the mail, between 8 and 30 letters a day, every day, and he would go to Chilton's. Because when you bought this kit, it had a C-sized piece of paper, 24 by 36. Folded up, we had the champion origami guy. Could fold it up and stick it on the back of the hang card, right? And it covered Packards and Fords and stuff. And someone say, I got a 1932 De La Salle DeSoto special, and I can't figure out where the green wire goes. And this poor guy would look it up in Chilton's and write him a handwritten letter explaining how to hook that up to his DeSoto. Then he quit, and we killed the project. But this project funded the Model 1 computer. If we didn't sell enough of those, there would be no Tandy Computer Company. All right, this is an aerial view of Fort Worth around 1985. That's the Tandy Towers. Why are there two of them? Come on, you got this. Why are there two?
Redundancy.
No. Who's in one of them? Who's in the other one? Radio Shack's in that one. Tandy's in that one. We call that the DMZ. It's actually an ice rink. Radio Shack is there. Tandy is there. All right. Later on, they tore up this parking lot and built another building right there in this area. So that's where we worked when we got out of the tire store. They put us in these buildings right here. So I was on the 10th floor of Tower 2 over here. So how often did we have to walk all the way over here, and Radio Shack was on the 11th floor, and have a meeting? How often did they come down here and walk across and go over here? Thank you. One of the good perks, though, we have our own private subway system, the longest private subway system in the United States. So that's the good news. The bad news is you had to park over here, wait for the train, went under town, come up, and where did the train let off?
Radio Shack.
Thank you. So by the time you parked your car over here and walked over here and waited for the train to come and came back and walked over, it was about 40 minutes. The good part was in the June of 1980, we had 30 days in a row over 100. My car had vinyl seats and no air conditioning. So I'm going to talk about what I did specifically when I came to Tandy after I graduated from Texas A&M. So I first worked at a company called Data General. And to my shock, if you go to the retro, there's a whole Data General setup with a terminal and a drive and a Eclipse computer. So if you read the book, The Soul of a New Machine, that computer is what's in that book. Not that computer, but the Eclipse line. And I'd still be there today. To this day, it's the best job I've ever had. It was job 1 of 14. I didn't want to leave, but they sold the building to the state of Texas and kicked us out. And so I picked up the phone and I called my old boss, Chris. And I said, Chris, do y'all need anybody up there? He goes, they fired you already? It's only been a year. And I said, no, they laid us off. He goes, fine, how much they paying you? So I went, $19,200. Now, that was probably the dumbest number I threw out. What does that number mean if you're in computers? What is 19.2? It's a modem frequency. It's a UART frequency, right? That's all I could think of was 19.2. And he goes, you're lying, I'll pay you 18.5. Come here on Monday. And I was making 18.6 at Data General. I should have said 19.3, but when I said 19.2, he knew I was messing around. So the job was to build a modem, 300 baud modem. So before my modem, they were all acoustic couplers, right? Novation Cats, the old ASR 33 teletypes. But I wanted to do a direct connect modem, which means it plugs straight into the wall. Only the year before where you were allowed to plug stuff, and that's called the Carter phone decision, that you were even allowed to touch the jack. And then they had FCC Part 68, which is 5,000 pages of why you can't plug anything in there, because you'll kill people and, you know. Right. Right. But that's what they wanted me to do. And so what I did was I found a Motorola CMOS modem chip that needed discrete analog filters, and I designed the analog filters on a Model 1 in BASIC. And I basically wrote my own version of SPICE, which is a circuit simulation, and I designed these filters, and I would run it all weekend. I would start on Friday and run it till Monday to calculate the resistors and capacitors I needed. So at the time, how many people here are like DIY people? If I say the word mouser, you know what I'm talking about, right?
Oh, yeah.
I got a package from them today.
There you go. Well, mine's supposed to be here yesterday. But all right. In 1980, you could get 1% resistors. So Mouser is a big mail order place you can buy resistors. 1% resistors, through-hole resistors, are probably a penny a piece. 1980, they were almost $1 a piece. But the problem was the capacitors. So to do the filter, to be accurate, I had to have 1% resistors and 2% capacitors, or I couldn't pass FCC Part 68, right? So I needed a total of 10 capacitors and 20 resistors. That's a lot of money. And so back in the old days, the way you found parts before the internet is they had a directory called the Gold Book. And it was basically the yellow pages of electronics. So if you want capacitors, resistors, diodes, power supplies, it was just a listing of name, address, and phone number. So I started calling people about the capacitors. And the cheapest I could find in the US was like $1.10 a piece. But then someone said, you need to call A&A. I said, who's that? Oh, that's our Japanese parts subsidiary. I've never heard of them. You have to send them a telex. Wow. A what? It's on this yellow paper. A what? So we had a telex machine. So I sent a telex over to A&A, and I said, I need this capacitor, and gave them the specs. They said, Panasonic has one called the ECQP. It's not 2%, it only comes 1%. I'm like, great. How much is it? And so they said, it's 16 cents. And I'm like, no, it's not. So I said, price, please check and resend. You know what happened, right? What did the next telex say?
15 cents.
No, sorry for incorrect price, 13.5 cents. And so I bought that from Panasonic, and I used this design in 6 different products, including the Model 100 modem. It's in there. So if you have any Model 100, so Model 1000, here's Model 1000 modem, all that stuff. So this capacitor saved the day. And I got 3 patents based on that design. All right, so remember the Dirk? My name's in print, I'm somebody. I was so happy I was in the Radio Shack catalog. It's kind of a big deal. Remember the Radio Shack catalog? Everybody got one? Even when you died, you got one? All right. I was so happy. I cut this out. I sent it to my mother. She put it in a little frame. And then John Roach called me on the phone. And he says, I'm sorry, he kind of talked like this. He's from West Texas. He goes, son, what the hell is that thing on that picture? And I went, oh God, that's a prototype. It's not supposed to be there. Because that was a switch that was supposed to make it go 600 baud. But it turns out it can only go 600 baud if it's not over the phone line, if you put two of them back to back with a null modem adapter, but not over the phone line. So I took that switch out, thereby saving Tandy 38 cents a cost. Now, I had to redo the overlay, so we threw 5,000 in the trash, and I had to redo the manual, we threw 5,000 in the trash, but I still came out ahead. But the picture made it in the catalog. And that was one of the 3 times I personally went up the escalator, because when you went to John Roach's office, you had to go up the escalator of shame. And went up, it was an open escalator. It just went up to his office and down, the only place it went. And you went up to the office, everybody goes, that poor bastard, and you're going up, and his secretary was named Lou Ann, and he said, Mr. Roach would like to see you, Paul. I'm going, and he goes, did you do that? I go, yes, sir. He goes, don't do that ever again. I said, yes, sir, and that was our conversation. So I did lots of different things, but I will say my favorite projects were the graphics cards. I've always been fascinated by computer graphics. You went the Model 1, black and white, dancing demon, where you have the little dancing demon thing. I just thought it was cool. And so the first thing I did was the Model 2 graphics card. So that was 640 by 400 black and white. So it took an existing Model 2 card and you pulled off the character ROM and the video controller and plugged my board into that. So it's piggybacked, and it could do individual addressed. And it was used by NASA in the first 12 shuttle launches in mission control. So if you look at the mission control, they're looking at Model 2s with my graphics card in there. Then they were replaced by Sun workstations. But I'm not bitter. Freaking Sun. So that was the success. So Radio Shack would let you, so who's read The Soul of a New Machine, the book about? So what's the phrase in there about pinball? What does pinball mean? If you do it once, we'll let you do it again. And so that's the way they work. So that was success. So they said, what else do you want to do? And I said, well, I can take all that circuitry and put it to an ASIC. And of course, Radio Shack, what the heck is an ASIC, boy? Isn't that some kind of shoot? I go, no, it's a custom chip. So I designed Tandy's very first custom chip to take the Model 2 graphics and put it into a single chip, right? And so when you do an ASIC, at that time, you bought a fixed number of gates like an EEPROM, and you had to pay whether you used them up or not, right? You're going to pay this price, whether you use one gate or all of them. You're going to pay that price. And so I had a lot of leftover gates. And so I said, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to put some hidden line drawing hardware in there so I can speed up drawing lines. I got yelled at again. Was that in the spec? No. Why'd you do it? It was free. Was it free? Yeah. Does it work? Yeah. Don't do that again. Yes, sir. And the last graphic thing is it's a Model 2000, which is 640 by 40, 16 colors, 23 million pixels per second. So at the time this came out, it was the fastest graphics system in the world, not just in computer PC, in the world, except there's a flight simulator called Evans and Sutherland in Utah. They had a $2 million system that ran 30 million pixels per second. But I'm second to a $2 million flight simulator.
How much was that card?
I think it was $599. That's the card right there. So these are the cards. So that's the Model 2 graphics card. That's the Model 2000 graphics card. So this card was $499. And this is the ASIC version into a Model 3 graphics card. So I think that was like the most fun I had. And I was the only one doing it. I had no one. The glory of doing it by yourself is you get to go, yeah, I did that. What's the downside? Who are you going to ask? Who are you going to help? Who's going to help you? Nobody. Because everybody's busy doing their own thing. So it was like, I have, my children are 9 years apart. I'd say I have 2 only children. Because they're so far apart, right? And so we had a bunch of engineers, but we were basically all on our own. So that's pretty complicated. That was also the first 4-layer board Tandy ever did. Heaven forbid, they died and screamed I had to do a 4-layer board. Okay. So how many people here, has anybody here worked in the electronic design industry at all? Okay. How much time did you think I had to do that? That's a loaded question, I know, but what would be the normal time some people would do to do this from scratch, do you think? To bring it up, test it out, you wire out the prototype, you go to circuit board, you debug the circuit board, you give it to software people have to write the drivers, then you have to write the manual, put it in the retail packaging, and it has to be in the catalog, or you miss catalog, you're dead. I would think 9 to 12 months would be good. I did it in about 8 weeks. 8 weeks. All right. So I'm going to talk about how did Radio Shack approach Tandy and tell us we want something to buy. So I'm sure everyone's familiar with Mark Cuban and Shark Tank. Well, we had Shark Tank before Mark Cuban was out of junior high school. Okay. We had our own version of Shark Tank. So twice a year, Bernie Appel, president of Radio Shack, and the VP of Radio Shack, who was like manufacturing, right? So he reported to John Roach, but John Roach was over everything. This guy was strictly Tandy manufacturing, Bob McClure. They had this epic 2-day, 14-hour-a-day meeting at the Worthington Hotel, which is the hotel next to the Tandy Center. And it was basically like a Shark Tank. Vendors had 1 minute. Okay, who here plays chess? They had like a chess clock thing. You had 1 minute, and if they hit the button and you were talking, it was like, thank you, goodbye. You had 1 minute to pitch a single product, and if you were smart, you did it in 15 seconds. And then Bernie Appel would decide on the spot if he would put it in his stores, because they weren't your stores or my stores. They were his stores. If he's going to put, he's from Boston, your crap in my store. And then he would tell Bob McClure, all right, I'll take 20,000. And Bob McClure said, how much? And they go, $142.80. So that's the price that we sold to them. And when he said $142.80, he did not mean $142.81. He meant $142.80 or no deal. Now Bob McClure had to, on his feet, look at the product and think about how much the tooling would cost and the man hours and the markup and say, deal. And they would move on. In these sessions, these 2-day sessions, they would decide over 500 products this way. It was amazing. We had a court reporter doing the transcript because they didn't want anything on tape, and we were not allowed to read we could read the transcript, but we could not make copies. We had to give it back. Of all the things I did wrong or sneaky, I was very honest. I gave them all back. I sure wish I had one. Because one of the favorite things in there, to spoil a little part of my book, is they were arguing over an answer machine. And Bernie Appel said, okay, I want 120,000 answer machines. Bob McClure says, how much? Bernie says, $41.50. He says, that's too much. The tooling will cost too much. I'll arm wrestle you for the tooling. And the transcript says, parentheses, Bernie declines. So they even transcripted the little banter back and forth. So this product here, has anybody ever seen this? The Tandy Moog MG1 synthesizer, used by how many famous people? That would be none. Well, I designed that. So this was pitched in a Shark Tank by Moog Music as a prototype, right? So anybody here a musician? Okay, in a recording studio, what's the most common audio interface? No, it's not. That's for microphones. Quarter-inch jacks. Quarter-inch jack, quarter-inch audio. Guitar, quarter-inch jack. Headphone jack, quarter-inch jacks. So when Moog came in to pitch their synthesizer, what did it have on the back of it? All right, who wants to pretend what did Bernie Appel say when he saw that? Anybody? You have to talk like Bernie. Anybody? Excuse my language, but where am I supposed to plug that? Up my butt? Now, that sounds funny, but he was making a very serious point. What was his point? What's in a Radio Shack store? What's the most common audio interface in a Radio Shack store? RCA jack. RCA jack. Where is he going to plug that? Well, we own Tandy Wire and Cable, so I went, we can make an adapter cable, quarter-inch to RCA. And Bernie says, and am I supposed to give that free in the box? No. So we had to retool and put RCA jacks on it. It's the only synthesizer ever made that has phono jacks on the back of it.
Holy crap.
He didn't like the idea of an extra product being sold in the store?
No, he couldn't sell it in the store because people would take it home and not have it and get mad and return it. So I want to talk about the design flow. So after the Shark Tank, we had the software, we had the computer and the consumer directors would split the products up. So we were still making answer machines. Tandy was #1 in the world in answer machines, in cordless phones, and in voltmeters. Okay? And that was nothing to do with computers. So the consumer side was really big. And once Bernie had a PO, Bob committed to a schedule and delivery price. And this was all done before they came where? To us. They go, yes, the good news is I got R&D 17 new products to design, and here they are. And we're like, what? Well, that's your problem to solve, and he walks away. So delivery price was the BOM and labor and the fixed profit for Tandy. So that's what Radio Shack. So Radio Shack treated Tandy like Sony. We want 100,000 answer machines, and I'm going to pay you $48 a piece for them. Right? And the cheaper we made it, the more money we made. But it wasn't $48.01, it was $48. So what was the pressure on Tandy engineers? To make it as high reliable as possible? No. What? Cheap? You mean like it's crappy design? Right. And what does that usually mean? Crappy design. Okay, so we were in trouble because there were a lot of times there were parts in front of us that we wanted to use, but we just couldn't use them because we couldn't meet the markup. Anybody here think that Radio Shack had a fair markup? So who knows here what a point of margin is? Gross points of margin, not percent profit, gross point. Okay, what's the average margin in consumer products, you think, today?
Tiny.
It's like, no, 6 to 8%. Okay. Radio Shack, 61 points of margin.
Holy cow.
That means you mark it up about 8 times. All right? And you had to be in the catalog. The catalog that Radio Shack printed was the most printed thing in the world over the Bible. It was the single most printed thing in the world, and it had to be in the catalog on June the 15th. Or what did you miss? Christmas. And if you miss Christmas, you're sunk. So they decided that we needed a new building for R&D. We were getting a lot of pushback from the stock market saying, you guys need to do more computers and more elaborate computers. And so they decided to buy a new building across the street, and they built this building called the Technology Center. And knowing what I've talked about Tandy and Radio Shack, I'm sure you know that they went to the finest architect in America and had them design it with full engineering input about what engineers would like to see surprisingly, in an engineering building. Does that look like anything kind of in general? Just in general? What does that building look like? Okay.
Like a hospital, yeah.
Kinda. It's a bank building. They bought plans for a bank that they never completed from the architect, but the bank only went up to here. So it's a combination bank office building, right? But we had to add 2 more floors, right? Couldn't take the weight, right? They're not going to pay to redo it. So if you have a building, and you want to add floors, but you want to reduce the total weight load of the building, what's a simple solution? We're going to have an atrium, a nice atrium. Who thought that when we moved from the Tandy Center to here, we got much bigger labs and much bigger spaces and everything was great? Who thought we got smaller labs and smaller offices because they took all the floor space to make the atrium so they could add the 2 floors, that if they would have kept it to 4 floors, we'd have had more space in the first place. Nobody asked me about it. I'm just going to put this in there. This is the director of the computer side. So this name is Bill Wilson, and so he managed every computer product from the Model 1000 to when AST bought us. He was in charge. He had a double degree, but he came from Texas Instruments. And inside of this brochure, I'm the only person that still has one, I don't know why. There's a picture of Bill Wilson. This is my bench looking at my logic analyzer with our receptionist. All right? And it's a logic analyzer. He knows what that is. So this is a wireless logic analyzer. You don't have to hook the probes up to the front of it. You can put the probe, and it will transmit the data over the air. So peak Tandy computer design was 82 to 1990. We had 200 people involved in just the computer design. 4 people did everything else. So all the consumer stuff was me as a floater and 4 people. Over 200 people. Now see, can you see where Radio Shack would have a problem with that? Right? So in other words, if they wanted me to design, so here's Alpine and Blaupunk. So I designed car stereos for both Alpine and Blaupunk. That was just Paul designing by himself, and Alpine gave us $25 million for a new car stereo. I got to pay 200 people to come up with a Model 2000, right? Can you see the problem that Radio Shack was having Tandy R&D? All right. Half those people were in software, so we did all of our own software, LDOS and DeskMate and ScriptSit and all that stuff. We were always crammed for working condition. We had less floor space when we moved across. All right? And since we had less floor space, the engineers had to resort to clandestine activities to find room in the new building. We called it the Jim Giese wall creep. So Jim Giese was the facilities manager. And he always carried a tape measure with him. And we had steel case cubicles, right, all lined up. But the center wall was not fixed. You could push it. And if someone wasn't paying attention, you could just push it a little bit every day, and all of a sudden and so Jim Giese would every once in a while get his, ha, 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 and it pushed the wall back. Next day, we're pushing the wall. That's how we had to do to get space. We had to push the walls around. So I want to wrap up with people say, what happened? Everybody says, I love it. It was there. It went away. What happened? Amazon. It's before Amazon. Okay, who remembers this?
The Bible.
Why did I put this up here? What happened? How many people were that guy in your family? Oh, I know a guy that can build you a computer really cheap. I know a guy. Turns out there was a lot of people who knew a guy. And Computer Shopper wasn't helping any. There was a time when you could get a Computer Shopper and get a full XT clone for about $1,000. At the same time, you could buy an XT clone for $1,000, get a Radio Shack and buy a 20 gig SCSI drive for $1,000. Who remembers Incredible Universe? Lost over $150 million. Who remembers the premise of Incredible Universe? They had a premise, a business model. Anybody remember? Who here ever read Consumer Reports or looked at Consumer Reports? Remember Consumer Reports? So the guy who thought this up, he loved Consumer Reports. But it turns out that if you want to buy a refrigerator and they say this is the Consumer Reports recommended model, that model is only available in the Northeast United States. Because they call those white goods, they're only by zip code and they protect dealers. And they say you can't have the good one until what? If you want the good one, we'll give you the good one, but what? You better sell 25 of the old one, then you get the good one. So he was frustrated. You couldn't go anywhere in Dallas-Fort Worth and get the best refrigerator. So what do you think the premise of the Incredible Universe was? No. We have every single model they make of everything you want. Every refrigerator, washer, dryer, microwave oven, TV, boombox, we have every model they make. At a discount, list price. List price, MSRP. Because why? We have everything. You can't go anywhere and not get it. Do people love that idea? I'm saying no. Who remembers this little critter? I want to know how drunk the guy who came up with it and the guy at Radio Shack who thought it was a good idea. There must be photographs of them somewhere. All right, here's some things that I personally was involved in that were not successes, but none of it was my fault. Thor, read-write audio CD player, based on the fact that the demo was faked. Read my book and find out more. $30 million loss. Who remembers DCC, or even what DC, the digital compact cassette, right? We're going to use a non-standard size cassette called the E-cassette that we've tooled up and nobody wanted, so we have a factory, and we're going to make digital tracks on it, so it's like a DAT player. Who remembers a DAT player? But a DAT player was helical scan like a VHS machine. This was a linear thing, and they never could get the head working because it only had a 5% yield. So you make 100 heads on a silicon wafer and 5 are good. $15 million. Tandy Sensation MPC. It's not that bad. Anybody ever heard of Sensation? Even remember? Who remembers the MPC specification for Windows, the Multimedia Personal Computer specification? You're welcome, I wrote that.
I actually have one disk.
It's all my fault. I wrote the spec. It was too expensive. It was slow. It wasn't Sound Blaster compatible, especially a multimedia computer. It used remember CD-ROMs? How did you buy a CD-ROM drive? What was the marketing thing you looked at? 1X, 2X, 16X. 2X drive. Well, that was LightScribe. But I'm talking about this was like how fast it could read. 1X, 2X, 3X, 32X, 48X, right? 2X. But man, it was cheap. Thor. This is the breadboard of Thor. Now, when I look at this breadboard, I'm thinking IBM, HP, NASA, Radio Shack. That's what it looked like. So last part of my presentation, so I'm a little bit over. Tandy's nail in the coffin, right? The product that I think was the downside of Tandy, which then killed Radio Shack. And here was their tagline, zapping a gazillion xylophones. What product was it? I wonder if someone in the room has a hint of what that product was called. VIS, the Video Information System. There you go. Remember that slow CD-ROM we had? Let's put it in a slow set-top box and just keep the system going. So this was like a PlayStation that ran at 1/100th the speed of a PlayStation for twice the cost. So they finally decided that they were tired of Bill Bixby. They were tired of Isaac Asimov. They were tired of Bill Gates. Let's go back and get the Norwegian family in here, and they're all watching TV. So it cost $700, but they thought this was the kicker. Multimedia encyclopedias. Because when I think what the world wants, it's more encyclopedias. Would it surprise, who here remembers the Encyclopedia Britannica? Okay, what was their marketing scheme for that? It was what? There was nothing better. It was the pinnacle, and it came in this little thing, and it cost like $4,000, but your kids will be really smart. Well, they said, well, we're going to basically give you a multimedia encyclopedia for $700, and that's going to be great. And the guy who thought up this product, would it surprise you, he used to be a marketing manager where? Encyclopedia Britannica. Well, it came out in November of 1992. We built 45,000, so at the Shark Tank, Bernie says, I want 45,000, I want them for Christmas, because that's going to generate $25 million in sales. I'm going to put 9 in every store, they're going to sell out. And did that happen? 8,500 sold. And 5,000 of those were through a company we remember called Tiger Direct. The project was canceled on January the 10th. The fastest Radio Shack failure in corporate history. It lost $200 million. That was the final straw. Tandy spun itself off as a new company, lays off 10%, canceled my vacation. And then AST buys Tandy. Did they buy us because we're such smart, clever people? We had wide-ranging. No, Intel was on processor allocation, so they bought our company so they could buy Intel's processors. Then they laid everybody off the next day. So this is my last slide. So things were so horrible. Why do people stay? First thing, I'll just say, it was the 80s. And the second thing is, what percent of the Tandy R&D population was male? 100%. We were one floor in the building. The building had 21 floors. What percent of the other 20 floors were female? About 100%. Did I mention I met my wife in a stairwell? Yeah. But the main thing is we were competing with IBM and Compaq. I mean, we were competing with real companies. We never considered ourselves a real company, by the way. The engineers, we weren't a real company. But we were competing. We were also Motorola Semiconductor. We were their number 1 account in the world. Repeat, we were number 1 in the world. We had 5 full-time account managers whose job was to take us to lunch. My record was never been broken. It's legendary. It'll be in the book 41 days in a row. And actually softball, really softball. The social thing that held Tandy Corporation, not Radio Shack, but Tandy together was softball. And so that's the Tandy R&D softball team, and I was the pitcher right there. But what would have been better? And I alluded to this, we were never fully funded in terms of floor space, equipment, or personnel. And why do you think that was? Do you think it was because they thought we didn't deserve it, or we weren't earning our keep, or what do you think the real reason was? Anybody have an idea? Huh?
Tight margins.
Well, No. They never convinced themselves that computers were going anywhere. Because they didn't come from computers. Where did they come from? Clock radios and cassette recorders and blank tape. If you, in 1984, if you spun off blank tape and batteries, you were $120 million with 50 points of margin. Right? There were more Radio Shacks in 1984 than McDonald's and 7-Eleven combined. But they never bought in that these computers were going to go anywhere, even though the numbers showed it and they read about it, because why? Well, what's the hardest thing for most people to say in their life? I made a mistake. I made a mistake. And what was their mistake? Forget the little clock radios that come in 12 different flavors. We're going to go take over the computer business. All right, thanks for coming.
Y'all started with an oscilloscope. What kind of oscilloscope did you have back then?
Had a B&K Precision. We didn't have Tektronix or HPs. We had a company called B&K Precision. And then we went to a company that used to rip off HP called Leader, Leader. And then another Japanese company tried to rip off Tektronix called Kikutsui. And they got their butts sued big time, and they came and went really quick.
You still only had one probe the whole time.
Yeah, well, it came with 2 probes, but usually you had to hide one because when you went home, the other one left, and so it was, yeah, they just did not, like that logic analyzer I showed you. Did we own that? Did I own that logic analyzer? No. What did I do? You leased it. Because the VP, John Patterson, one day came by my office and goes, sorry, everybody talk like they're from West Texas, because where they go, why is that thing always turned off every time I walk by here? I said, well, John, I don't need it all the time, but when I need it, I really need it. It's kind of like the fire department. Do people care if the fire department's like mowing the grass and playing volleyball, or do they care about what happens when they come to your house in the next 30 seconds when your kids are inside? You don't care that they're playing volleyball yesterday. You care about what they're doing today. And that's what we tried to tell them. I said, John, we don't need it all the time, but this is the only way we can fix it. And he goes, well, it's an awful lot of money just sitting around not doing anything. That's what we had to deal with. Okay? When I was at Data General, my boss would say, need like 3 more? Because I got 3 more over here, I'll give you. Anybody else? No? All right, thanks everybody. Go to Facebook and look at Mostly True Tales and sign up. Maybe next year I'll have my book tour ready.